What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and I have some Dynasty content for you guys today. So I'm going to be going through my top 24 Dynasty running backs, and then also splitting these players up into tiers. Also going to be going through my top 24 wide receivers tomorrow, so stay tuned for that video. I've been doing a ton of redraft, just wanted to get a little break, get some Dynasty content out there, and honestly, let's just jump right into it. So we're going to be starting off in tier 1. Two players in this tier. It's going to be Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall. I'm not going to be going crazy in depth on every single player because we'd be here all day. Just kind of briefly, talking about each player, going through the tiers, tier by tier. So starting off with Bijan and Breece Hall, these two seem to be like the consensus top two Dynasty running backs. I think if I wanted to, we could split this up into tier 1 and tier 2. I do think Bijan is the clear-cut number 1. 21 years old, was the number 8 pick in the draft, crazy draft capital. He's probably the best running back prospect we've seen in the last few seasons, probably since a guy like Saquon Barkley, and he's already being drafted as a top 5 running back in redraft. So for me, he is going to be my Dynasty running back 1. Then we have Breece Hall, and I think if Breece Hall didn't tear his ACL, he would definitely be in the conversation right here with Bijan Robinson, because Breece Hall was on pace to have a really, really impressive rookie season. If he doesn't tear that ACL, he may be a year older than Breece Hall, but he has the great season behind him. But that's not how things played out. Even with the ACL tear, I still have him as my clear-cut RB2. Crazy athlete. Reports have been really positive about his recovery, and then averaged over 20 points per game in his small sample size as the clear-cut RB1 last season. Now shifting into tier 2, this is going to be a 3-man tier. It's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, Jonathan Taylor, and Christian McCaffrey. Now I went Gibbs at 3, JT at 4, Christian McCaffrey at 5. And I feel like these guys really could be switched up in a variety of different orders. They're pretty much 3 running backs in 3 very different stages of their career. Starting off with Jahmyr Gibbs, only 21 years old, was the 12th pick in the draft, which, just like pick 8, that is crazy draft capital for a running back. I think Jahmyr Gibbs has the upside of being a running back 1 for the foreseeable future, and I do think he has the upside to put together some high-end RB1 seasons. We just haven't, seen it out on the NFL field yet. So he's younger, but he doesn't have that locked-in production compared to Jonathan Taylor, who has given you a fantasy running back 1 overall season, but he's going to be a little bit older, 24 years old. The thing with JT, though, is that he hasn't shown the nuclear upside. If you want to hit a 24, 25 point per game season, you're going to need some more receiving work. JT hasn't shown that. Now, obviously, we're nitpicking here because there are going to be very few players who have that upside. Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Todd Gurley, players like that. I think that is in the range of outcomes for Jahmyr Gibbs, but obviously Gibbs hasn't really flashed it yet. And then Christian McCaffrey, 27 years old, so by far the oldest of this tier. And so, he may only have a few strong years left of fantasy production, but he's a guy who's delivered fantasy seasons averaging 29.3 points per game, 24.1 points per game, and is currently being drafted as the redraft running back 1. So I feel like depending on where your dynasty team is set up, you'd probably prefer a different option. If you're win now, the window is the next few years, you'd go Christian McCaffrey. If maybe your team is kind of, ascending, you're about to be ready to compete, maybe it's a JT. And then if you're kind of in a rebuild, Jahmyr Gibbs might be your guy. So I feel like just, 3 players that fill different needs on your dynasty rosters. Now shifting into tier 3, and I feel like this was probably the toughest tier to rank. It's going to be a pretty big tier. We're going to go Saquon Barkley at running back 6, then Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, Austin Eckler, Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, and Ramondre Stevenson. So starting off with Saquon Barkley here, 26 years old, coming off a running back 5 in point per game season. We'll kind of see how his contract status is working out here, but I just feel like he's a guy who should be a running back 1 for the next few seasons, and I do believe, as soon as this season, he does have that high-end running back 1 upside. Then we have Josh Jacobs, who's going to be a year younger than Saquon Barkley at 25, but is in a pretty similar contract spot. He's coming off of a season where he finished as the running back 3 in points per game, and the way the Raiders used Josh Jacobs last year, personally, I would hope he stays there. I think that was a nice spot. Obviously, assuming that coaching staff sticks around, which I don't think is a guarantee with how they looked last year. Maybe not the strongest roster heading into this season. But I also think it's important to point out that Josh Jacobs is one of the few NFL workhorses who really didn't shoulder a large college workload. He maxed out on carries his junior season with 120. So he's not like some of these other workhorse running backs who are carrying the ball 200 plus times, through multiple seasons in college. That's just not the way he was utilized. So maybe, he has a little bit more tread on the tires than you might think, just given his massive workload last year. Then we have Travis Etienne. And Etienne is honestly someone who's very interesting for me because I don't necessarily love him for redraft, but he's also the youngest of this group, 24 years old, and I did like him as a prospect. I think he has the potential to be a running back one on one of the better offenses for the next few seasons. But if you're not like in win now mode, I'd prefer Etienne over some of the guys behind him. But if the window is now, like you need wins, you're in that contending window, then I'd probably take an Eckler, Pollard, Chubb, guys like that over Travis Etienne, because I think there is a possibility that he never really takes that leap to be like a mid-tier fantasy RB1. But the thing is that I'm not like delusional enough to just blindly follow what I think, because say I'm wrong about redraft this year and he does get that workhorse role for the Jaguars, his value is definitely going to skyrocket. So I think there's some risk because maybe he never reaches that ceiling we expected, but it's also, the possibility is there. So I'm not going to totally bury him in these dynasty rankings. Right behind Etienne, we have Austin Eckler, who's going to be the oldest running back of this tier, 28 years old. But the guy's being drafted as a top 2 running back in redraft, so he's expected to give you a high-end RB1 season at least this year, probably the next 2-3, coming off back-to-back 21-plus PPR point per game seasons, so definitely a strong win-now running back. Then we have Tony Pollard after Austin Eckler. I view him as a mid-tier RB1 in redraft this season, 26 years old, but pretty much has like no tread on the tires. And I do think he has some legit upside this season. Pollard, I don't even think he played a running back in college. So, he had a very small college workload compared to these other running backs. And he's never really led a backfield in the NFL. So 26 years old, but, maybe he's fresher than some of the other 26-year-old running backs in the NFL. And then behind him, we have Nick Chubb, going to be a year older than Tony Pollard. I do view Chubb as a slightly better option for the 2023 season. Chubb has always been one of the best running backs in the NFL, but if he has the ability to add to his receiving workload this season, I think he can be a top-tier fantasy running back, to kind of pair with his top-tier real-life NFL running back ability. And then to wrap up this tier with Ramondre Stevenson, 25 years old, coming off a breakout in his second NFL season. I could see the argument for him being higher, definitely. I just don't really know what to make of this like Patriots running back room. Is he going to be with them long term? Just kind of struggle to trust Belichick here. He also did come in as an older prospect, so even though he's going to be 25 years old, he's going to be only going into his third NFL season. So we'll see how it shakes out. I do think he could end up outperforming this, but I don't know if I'd be willing to go after him over other win-now options like a Pollard, a Chubb, guys like that. Now, shifting into Tier 4, this is going to be a younger tier, so we're going to start it off with Kenneth Walker, then Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins, and then Najee Harris. All 3 of these running backs were drafted within the last 3 years. Starting off with Kenneth Walker, he's going to be the youngest of this group. I do think the Seahawks drafting Zach Charbonnet is a massive hit to his value. Others seem to not agree. On Keep Trade Cut, I feel like Kenneth Walker is like firmly in that tier 3 of guys. I really can't get there with him, if I'm being honest. I think, in the next few seasons, he's going to be a guy who can deliver RB2 seasons, but I just don't know where the upside is with Kenneth Walker. Like, who knows what happens? Injuries can pop up. Walker could end up on a new team. Charbonnet could end up on a new team. He could be injured. Lots of things could happen. But I just think his upside has taken a massive hit. And I don't think it's just his short-term upside, because heading into the season, the 2023 season, before the NFL draft, everyone's hope was that Kenneth Walker could take over this receiving role, right? He could have a 3-down workload. The problem is now, Kenneth Walker didn't catch passes in college. He didn't catch passes his rookie season. They specifically brought in someone else to catch passes, for the next few years, probably like 4 years for Zach Charbonnet. So is Kenneth Walker ever going to be catching passes? I think the strong bet would be no. So I feel like that's like a long-term upside hit, because it's very, very rare for running backs to not catch passes in college, then not catch passes in the NFL, and then all of a sudden become like a receiving option moving forward. So I think he's talented. I think he's a very good runner. but I do think his ceiling is kind of capped moving forward. The next guy is going to be Javonte Williams, and I do think he'd be leading this tier if he wasn't coming off of a ACL tear, and it wasn't a clean ACL tear, a little bit more severe than that. So, some concern there with the injury. He's 2 years into the NFL, and he has one kind of low-end RB2 season, and then he also has a new coaching regime coming in. So there are definitely some clear red flags when it comes to Javonte Williams. But on the other hand, if he can get healthy and get back to 100%, he has the opportunity to lead his backfield this season, is only 23 years old, and does have a 3-down skill set. So I feel like, the range of outcomes for Javonte Williams is pretty wide, but he is someone I'd be, kind of interested in just to kind of see how it shakes out. Behind Javonte Williams, we've got J.K. Dobbins, and I'm going to be higher on J.K. Dobbins than consensus. I understand the first 3 seasons of his NFL career, haven't played out like you would write it up, right? Rookie year, solid, kind of in a committee, tears his ACL heading into year 2, then kind of an injury-riddled year 3. But in the opportunity that J.K. Dobbins has had, he has been a very impressive NFL running back. He's going to be 2 seasons removed from that brutal knee injury. He had great production towards the end of last season, and that was while not being 100%. I think he also has the upside of being more involved in the passing game under a new offensive coordinator. The Ravens seem to want to be more pass-heavy, so I think that could also benefit J.K. Dobbins. And I'm guessing people are probably going to be surprised I have him ranked over Najee, but J.K. Dobbins is straight up younger than Najee Harris, and I also just view him as the better player. I think if these guys kind of, finish out their rookie deals, I think J.K. Dobbins has a much better opportunity of finding success somewhere else than a guy like Najee Harris. Now moving on to Najee, he's going to close out this tier. And I feel like people kind of view Najee as one of like these young running backs, and he is a guy, who was drafted within the last 3 seasons, but he's really not one of these young RBs. He's 25 years old, and he, at least in my opinion, has not proven that he is a good NFL running back through 2 seasons. He has not logged an efficient season yet, and if that doesn't change, I do think his value can fall off very quickly. Like if Jalen Warren starts to eat into Najee Harris's workload again, I think his dynasty value can take a massive hit. And I kind of feel like with Najee Harris, we're banking on him just like consuming this massive volume without being efficient with it. Kind of like a Leonard Fournette situation. And I don't know. I just feel like if he is getting that volume, I don't see that being a super likely situation. It's possible, but I just feel like Najee's longevity is not as fruitful as people may think. So that's why I'm going to be a little bit lower on him than consensus. Now moving into tier 5, going to be a 3-man tier. Got Dameon Pierce, Derrick Henry, and Joe Mixon. So we've got one kind of younger, somewhat unproven option, and then 2 short-term RB1s. So looking at Dameon Pierce, coming off an impressive rookie season, but as a day 3 pick with a new coaching staff, I feel like he's kind of at risk here of losing like that clear-cut starting role. If Dameon Pierce was like round 1, round 2, maybe even, probably not round 3, but like round 1, round 2, I think he could have an argument to be in tier 3. He probably would definitely be in tier 4. So it's unfortunate that like draft capital plays a big role, but honestly it does. Also, you have the new coaching staff, so we don't know how loyal they're going to be to him. He might lose the starting role he had last year, but if he is able to hold on, I think he'll end up being a massive value for Dynasty. Then moving over to Derrick Henry, 29 years old, and he has the most touches of any active running back. So it seems very likely that Derrick Henry's run as a fantasy RB1 is going to be ending soon. Maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year, but over the next few years, it's going to happen. But I still think he has a lot of value because you have the opportunity to be getting 1, maybe 2 more RB1 seasons out of him, which is going to be very valuable in the short term. And then for Joe Mixon, it may not seem like, he has a short-term option because he's 27 years old. There are other running backs that I have ranked ahead of him that I think may have a few more years. But the overall lack of efficiency from Joe Mixon kind of tells a different story. He will be back with the Bengals this season after restructuring his contract, and he does have the opportunity to be a fantasy running back 1 this year. But after the 2023 season, I do think like that might be it for fantasy. I think he could go out, deliver an RB1 fantasy season, and be almost irrelevant heading into 2024. We saw a guy like Ezekiel Elliott just completely fall off. Now he can't find a new team. Leonard Fournette, was an inefficient option who was a fantasy running back 1 over the past 2 seasons, also not on a roster. So it's not like these guys can't go from fantasy production to just not involved in an offense. Like, it can happen. And I do feel like that's kind of what's going to happen for Joe Mixon, but that definitely doesn't mean he can't help you win your fantasy championship, at least in 2023. And then shifting into the final tier, Tier 6, mostly young options in this tier are going to go Devin Achane, Zach Charbonnet, Cam Akers, Aaron Jones, and Rachaad White. So starting off with Achane and Charbonnet, both day 2 picks from this year's draft. I give Achane the slight edge because I think he has the better opportunity year 1, obviously assuming that Dalvin Cook does not sign with the Dolphins. And then despite being behind Walker for Zach Charbonnet, I think things can kind of change quickly, like I mentioned for Kenneth Walker. And I also don't think it's impossible that Charbonnet can carve out a solid workload. Like, I think he's going to be involved as a pass catcher. I think he'll have the opportunity to compete on the goal line, and he's going to filter in for some carries here or there. So who knows how that backfield shakes out. For Cam Akers, I kind of view him as like a budget J.K. Dobbins, both 2 years removed from serious injuries. He's still young at 24 years old. I'd say like the Akers situation with the Rams is a little bit less stable, but I do think if he could handle a serious workload with the Rams this year and end up kind of improving his dynasty value. For Aaron Jones, we've got Aaron Rodgers gone, which I think kind of hinders Aaron Jones' ability to deliver RB1 production. He's 28 years old, so getting up there, but I do think he can give you a couple more like RB2 seasons, mid-tier RB2 options. He hasn't fallen off in his play, so I think he's a nice, win now piece. And then Rachaad White, he really hasn't proven much yet in the NFL, but I think he's lined up for a strong workload here in 2023. I like them as a prospect, and we'll just kind of see how this season shakes out. If after this year he's not really worth much, wouldn't be shocked, but I also think he can improve on this value if he does, kind of command that starting role and is able to hold on to it moving forward. So that is going to wrap it up for my top 24 Dynasty running backs. Let me know what you guys think. Who do you think is too high? Who do you think is too low? Let me know your reasoning. I'll make sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Stay tuned for the top 24 wide receivers. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.